This attractive, calm image by English painter Alfred Sisley conveys the spirit of the Canal Saint Martin. I'm not at all sure where artist Sisley set up for his painting, but it certainly wasn't close to the part of the canal we're going to visit today. Still, this lovely painting does evoke the spirit of the place, calm, tree-lined, with boats, although not these boats. Let's take a walk along the Canal Saint Martin.
Hello and welcome back to the Armchair Traveler. My name is Judy. I love to travel. I do this on my own, and so can you. I'm here to teach you how.
At the beginning of the 19th century, Paris was a city with problems. It had limited clean drinking water and no easy way to bring food and firewood in from the countryside. Railroads were still pretty far in the future. Ox carts really couldn't handle the volume, and the waste from the animals, invariably dumped into the rivers and streams, made the water problems even worse. It seemed like nothing the residents could do would change the fact that the Seine River, from which they drew their drinking and domestic water, was filthy. Cholera and dysentery were everywhere. Among other things, disease affected the ability of Napoleon to raise troops. In 1802, Napoleon Bonaparte ordered the construction of the Canal Saint Martin. His vision was for this canal, and others connected to it, to become supply routes to Paris, bringing in food, fresh water, and other goods. By 1814, Napoleon was removed and sent, temporarily as it turned out, to Elba, but work continued under Louis XVIII. Louis lasted 1 year until Napoleon came boiling up from Elba and took command briefly again, only to be replaced later on by Louis XVIII again and others. Building the canal took until 1825, by which time Napoleon had been dead for 4 years. Meanwhile, most of Paris remained a cramped, dark, dank, dirty medieval town, long overgrown any rational city plan. In 1852, when Louis Napoleon, a nephew of the first General Napoleon, got himself elected as President of France. From what I've read, it was even an honest election. 4 years later, however, his term of office was coming to an end, and he decided he didn't want to go, so he staged a coup and named himself Emperor Napoleon III. Napoleon III implemented a huge public works program here in the city so that the tiny, incredibly filthy canals, like the one shown here, were removed and replaced, and the narrow streets, shown in the painting on the left, which were a perfect place for rioting Parisians to stage rebellions, were replaced by wide, barricade-proof avenues. Napoleon trusted this work to Baron Haussmann. Haussmann was a man with grand views and expensive tastes, and little, if any, interest in how much his work would cost. Millions of French francs at the time, by all accounts, or how many people got displaced and ended up homeless as he leveled their squalid living quarters to build those wide avenues. Haussmann profoundly transformed the looks and infrastructure of the city. This tourist map shows the extent of the canal system, which funnels water one way or another all the way from the Marne to the Seine. Notice the dotted part of the map, south of the Place de la République and the Place de la Bastille. This is where the canal dives underground and stays underground all the way to the Porte de l'Arsenal. Altogether, about half of it is in underground tunnels. This was a working canal, but eventually it was abandoned for freight use as trains became more common. It was also quite neglected. Any big piece of infrastructure, providing it's not hideous, and sometimes even when it is, can be repurposed, and this one has been, and in the time since I've been visiting the district. I'm sure the park-like surroundings and the trees help, but the biggest boost came in 2008, I think. It might have been the year before, when a number of richer residents, visitors, and shops started moving into the area. My notice of it began with a New York Times restaurant review that indicated that some cleanup would probably help along their prospects. I ate in that restaurant in 2008 and remember it well, but like time, it has slipped away and is no more. The Bassin de la Villette, or the La Villette Basin, is the largest artificial lake in Paris. It was first filled with water on December 2nd, 1808. The engraving shows what it must have looked like about 1820. The building you see here, and it's still there, is called the Rotonde de la Villette. It was the gateway of Paris for tax collectors to collect taxes on goods entering the city, either on the road or in the canals in the area. The square's name today remembers the Battle of Stalingrad during World War II. That battle lasted nearly 5 months. This was bloody urban warfare. Wikipedia tells us that 1.1 million Soviets were either killed or missing defending the city, along with about 7 750,000 Germans and Axis troops. An estimated 150,000 of those were Italians who were either killed, captured, injured, or missing. One of them, many years later, became my barber in downtown Washington, D.C. The man had a remarkable career. He managed to escape the Battle of Stalingrad and landed, we think, in Africa. He had been a barber before he got swept up into the war. He landed in a POW camp where he was still a barber and eventually made it to America, where he opened up his own business as a barber. Train, bus, and subways all run near here. You can see some of the additional infrastructure required in this picture postcard. Over the opening to the tunnel for the canal is a kiosk for the General Omnibus Company. Above that is a viaduct built for the Paris Metro Line 2, which here ran above ground. Sometimes called the Bassin de l'Arsenal, this lake is the final connection for goods and water traveling from far outside the city all the way to the Seine. In the distance in this photo, you can just make out the July 14th column at the Place de la Bastille. The Port de l'Arsenal was far too big to be shoved underground, so the area between the site of the Bastille and the Seine is an above-ground lake today. This unattributed image shows the destruction of the Bastille with the very large ditch and walls in the foreground. That ditch eventually was converted into the lake. The streets north of the Place de la Bastille are interesting, but they are just streets. Let's take a look at the above-ground canal instead. On various visits to the canal starting in about 2005 or so, I always walked north or outbound and away from the Seine, starting here at the square Frédéric Lemaitre, which was the closest approach from the Marais, the former Jewish quarter. Lemaitre was an actor and primarily a comedian. He was famous for the number of plays he did in theaters along the Boule de Crime, the nickname given in the 19th century to the former Boulevard du Temple, because of the many crime melodramas that were shown here every night in its many theaters. The area is notorious in French history for having lost so many theaters during Haussmann's rebuilding of Paris in 1862. Perhaps this little part is an acknowledgement of the damage done by Haussmann's rebuilding of the city. An advertising flyer for one of Lemaitre's melodramas is shown on the right. The park has more than just Lemaitre's name. It also has a commemorative statue. The sign reads, "Dedicated to the memory of Frédéric Lemaitre, comedian." This photograph illustrates one of the many areas where the canal dives under a park or a street. The broad pathways on either side, now called quays or pathways, were once towpaths. Here we see a canal boat and lock on the Saint Martin Canal. You can see that the boat has already cleared the lock gate, seen in the foreground on the left, and is waiting for it to close. The water level here has to rise. The clue is the algae growing along the walls of the lock, so that the boat could move on to the next higher section of the canal in front of it. You can see the rather dramatic change in height needed to move the boats from one level to another in this photograph. The extravagant arched walkway beyond the lock is the Passerelle des Douanes. This is a rather better view of the passerelle I just mentioned. Not all the crossings are this elaborate or pretty. It is also, unfortunately, extremely handicapped unfriendly. A great deal of architecture here in the city shares this defect, particularly entrances to many of the metro stations, all built well before there was an awareness of the importance of making the city accessible to everybody. This is a view of some of the rather unfriendly steps leading to and from the bridge over the canal that I mentioned earlier. This is the gatehouse at the Temple Lock. The building is higher than the level of the walkway to protect it from the occasional flood. It is also equipped with a garbage picker and net, which I've circled, for cleaning the debris out of the canal. Infrastructure requires maintenance. No infrastructure can function forever without it, and the canal is no exception. Despite the large number of trash cans all along the towpaths, garbage ends up in the water. Every 15 to 20 years or so, the city has to close the canal down to clean it up. The last cycle of cleaning was in 2016. The city closed the canal, removed the fish, I think they had to have been catfish or carp because nothing else could live in that muck, and drained the canal section by section. They built cofferdams as needed while they removed all the garbage. Bicycles, grocery carts, mopeds, and for all I know, to the contrary, dead bodies. Then they dredged the muck, repaired the bridges and locks, and opened it back up. While all of this was going on, I suspect the area stank quite badly. This an extremely trendy area of Paris and increasingly expensive to live in. I've overheard Parisians muttering about les touristes, more or less under their breath, who they blame for innovations like this McDonald's, and to some extent it's true. This particular McDonald's really doesn't represent much in the way of blight, and it brings a much-needed amenity to the area, clean restrooms open to the public. In my observation, incidentally, as many French speakers are to be found here as anybody else. Thank you for visiting the Canal Saint Martin with me today. My next visit, I hope to take the cruise all the way from Bassin de la Villette to the Seine, which will make a pleasant excursion for the armchair traveler, and one which won't require much climbing of steps or walking. I hope to see you next time. If you found this video interesting or helpful, please give it a like, share, and subscribe to my channel. It's free to you, but it will help the channel grow. Travel sites and history can be word-heavy, especially background information, so some of my video blogs have companion pieces with more for you. There are also pieces which don't make it into video format at all. You can check them out on my WordPress blog site. The address is armchairtraveler2022.wordpress.com. If you'd like to keep up when I post new blogs or video blogs, or are interested in tweet-sized posts, follow me on Twitter. My handle there is @armchair2022. I will tweet updates for new posts, and when I begin traveling again, will take you along in short form on Twitter.